Racist female detective kicks black judge in open court. What happens next destroys her career. Before we start today's story, comment below where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you haven't already. You won't want to miss what's next. You don't deserve that robe, you arrogant bastard. Detective Kara Whitmore shouted before kicking Judge Elias Monroe hard in the stomach, right there in open court, in front of everyone. Gasps filled the courtroom as the respected judge stumbled back, clutching his midsection. But that kick didn't just cause physical pain. It started a chain reaction that would destroy a whole career built on lies, racism, and murder. It wasn't just an assault on a black judge. It was the moment someone finally went too far against the wrong man. What Detective Whitmore didn't know was that Judge Monroe had already been digging deep into her record. He had been quietly reviewing old case files that powerful people in the county had worked hard to keep secret. Inside those files was evidence, including hidden video footage, that proved how far the police department would go to protect its own. It was the kind of evidence that could destroy lives, expose corruption, and reveal how a black teenager had been murdered and covered up. What began as a normal day in court was about to become the spark that started a massive federal investigation. For years, the system had tried to protect dirty cops and racist officers, but this time, everything was going to fall apart. When the truth came out, it would shake the whole foundation of law enforcement in Riverside County, and change everything for those who thought killing black children was just part of the job. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Courtroom 7A in the Riverside County Criminal Justice Center. The light fell across the old wooden benches, worn smooth from decades of families sitting there, hoping to find justice. Usually, the room was quiet and predictable, a place where lawyers argued and decisions were made in calm voices. But this Tuesday morning was different. This was the morning when 15 years of buried racism and abuse would finally explode. Judge Elias Monroe adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses as he looked down at the file in front of him. He was 48 years old, with a serious face that showed both wisdom and exhaustion. He had read thousands of case files over the years, but this one kept him awake for 3 nights straight. On the surface, it seemed ordinary. A 15-year-old girl named Imani Brooks, charged with disorderly conduct and threatening behavior toward a law enforcement officer. But Judge Monroe had learned to see the truth behind official language. He had seen this kind of case before, too many times, in fact. And one name kept appearing over and over: Detective Kara Whitmore. In his experience, whenever Whitmore's name was attached to a case, something didn't add up. The same kind of vague charges always appeared: resisting authority, disrespect, aggressive posture. And the defendants were always the same type of kids: young, black, and scared. That morning, Imani Brooks sat quietly in the front row. She wore her school uniform, clean, pressed, and perfect, as if she was trying to show the world that she belonged somewhere safe. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she stared down, careful not to move too much. Her father, Victor Brooks, sat beside her, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. In his other hand, he held a folder stuffed with her certificates, honor roll awards, letters from teachers, and volunteer forms. It was proof that Imani was a good kid. Her only mistake was existing in Detective Whitmore's patrol area. Then the courtroom door opened with a deep metallic creak. Everyone turned. Detective Kara Whitmore walked in. At 5 feet 10 inches, she was tall and solid, with the confidence of someone used to getting her way. Her dark blue police uniform was spotless, and every button and stripe was perfectly aligned. Her belt, heavy with her service weapon and badge, pulled slightly at her waist. Her gray eyes were sharp, cold, and calculating, the eyes of a woman who believed she was untouchable. When Whitmore's gaze landed on Imani, her expression hardened. Then she looked up at Judge Monroe. There was a flicker of something, not quite hatred, but disrespect. It was the kind of look that said, "You may be a judge, but you're still beneath me." Judge Monroe had seen that look before, the same silent contempt from people who believed their power made them immune from consequences. But what Whitmore didn't know was that she wasn't the only one investigating. For months, Judge Monroe had been quietly gathering information about her. In his private office, he had a thick manila folder full of documents that connected Whitmore to a pattern of abuse and corruption that stretched across the county. And he was finally ready to expose it. The air in Courtroom 7A was thick with tension, the kind of silence that comes before a thunderstorm. "Detective Whitmore," Judge Monroe said firmly. Please describe what happened that led to Miss Brooks's arrest. Whitmore leaned back slightly in the witness chair, crossing her legs as if she owned the place. Your Honor, she began in a practiced tone, I was conducting a routine patrol in the East Side District when I observed a group of juveniles loitering near the Metro bus stop at 5th and Henderson. Given the recent reports of drug activity in that area, I decided to perform a community wellness check. Judge Monroe's pen scratched across his legal pad. He didn't need to ask what that phrase meant. Community wellness check was Whitmore's way of saying she had stopped a group of black teenagers for no real reason. And how many juveniles were in the group? He asked. 5 total, Whitmore replied. 4 males and 1 female, all appearing to be between 14 and 17 years old. Yet only Miss Brooks was arrested, said the judge. Why is that? For the first time, Whitmore looked slightly uncomfortable. The other subjects dispersed immediately upon my approach, she said. Miss Brooks displayed behavior that required additional intervention. Judge Monroe made another note, keeping his face calm even as anger burned beneath his composed expression. He had spent the previous night reviewing her old reports, spreading them out across his desk like puzzle pieces. What he saw had made him sick. 17 arrests in the past 18 months. 16 of those were black teenagers. And every report used nearly the same words. Marcus Johnson, 16, arrested for aggressive eye contact. Destiny Parker, 15, charged with hostile body language. Trevor Stevens, 14, arrested because his fists were clenched. These weren't crimes. They were excuses. But the file that haunted him most was one name, Malik Moore. 16 years old. Dead. Whitmore's report said she had shot Malik during a routine traffic stop gone wrong. The department claimed Malik had reached for a weapon. Whitmore said she acted in self-defense. She was even given a medal for bravery. But that medal had been bought with lies. A few days earlier, a veteran officer from Internal Affairs, Detective Raymond Reeves, had secretly met with Judge Monroe in his chambers. Reeves had been investigating Whitmore for 2 years. Every time I get close, he told the judge, evidence disappears, and witnesses change their stories. But I managed to get copies of something you should see. He handed over a manila envelope. Inside were copies of Whitmore's original reports from Malik Moore's shooting. They didn't match the official version. In her first report, Whitmore had written, the subject appeared to be retreating when engagement began. The final report said, the subject advanced aggressively. In her notes, she had written, no weapon recovered at the scene initially. The official version added a fake detail, weapon found 15 feet from body. The most shocking line was her handwritten note, uncertain about threat level at time of shooting. That line had been completely erased. Now Judge Monroe had proof that not only had Whitmore lied, but someone in power had helped her cover it up. He looked up from his notes and said, Detective Whitmore, you said Miss Brooks showed concerning behavior. What exactly did she do? Whitmore straightened. She refused to look away when I ordered the group to disperse. She stared directly at me. In my experience, that kind of eye contact can be a warning sign of aggression. The room went completely silent. Even the air felt heavier. Imani's father tightened his grip on her hand. Judge Monroe set down his pen and looked directly at her. Are you saying that maintaining eye contact with a police officer is a crime? Whitmore's face turned red. In my professional experience, she said stiffly, prolonged eye contact can signal hostility. We're trained to recognize warning signs before things get out of hand. The judge tilted his head. And what kind of behavior do you consider appropriate for a 15-year-old black girl during a police encounter? Whitmore hesitated, but her pride wouldn't let her stop talking. Respectful behavior, she said finally. Immediate compliance. No backtalk or attitude. Judge Monroe's expression didn't change. And if the child asks questions about why she's being stopped? Questions, Whitmore said sharply, are often just disguised arguments. A respectful person obeys first and asks questions later through the proper channels. The entire courtroom could feel it. Whitmore didn't even realize how much she was revealing. Her words showed how deeply she believed that police authority was absolute, and that black children were dangerous by default. Behind his calm face, Judge Monroe's thoughts were racing. He knew this wasn't just about one cop. It was about a system that had allowed her to ruin dozens of lives. He had seen the statistics himself. Black teens in Whitmore's patrol area were 17 times more likely to be arrested than white teens, even though the crime rate was the same. Now it was time to confront her directly. "Detective Whitmore," he said suddenly, his tone sharper now. "In your 15 years as an officer, how many minors have you arrested for behavioral violations?" Whitmore blinked, caught off guard. "I don't have an exact number, Your Honor. Maybe 60 or 70. Most of them never go to trial. They learn their lesson and move on." Judge Monroe leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers. "And of those 60 or 70, how many were minorities?" The question hit the room like thunder. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of it hung in the air, heavy, dangerous, and undeniable. Everyone knew the answer, even before she said a word. Whitmore's confident look disappeared, and her eyes moved nervously around the courtroom, like she was searching for an exit that didn't exist. The silence in the room was heavy, every person watching her closely, waiting for what she would say next. "I don't pay attention to race, Your Honor," she said quickly, trying to sound calm. "I respond to behavior, not demographics." The judge nodded slightly. "That's admirable, Detective," Judge Monroe said in a quiet but firm voice. "But surely you can give a rough estimate." Whitmore's hands, which had been resting casually on the armrests of the witness chair, slowly tightened into fists. "I patrol an area with diverse people," she said stiffly. "My arrests simply reflect the community I serve." Judge Monroe looked down at his notes, flipping through them with slow, deliberate precision. "According to the latest census," he said, "your patrol area is 38% black. Would you say your juvenile arrests reflect that same breakdown?" The question hit her like a closing trap. It was too exact, too sharp. There was no room to dodge or talk her way out. Whitmore's face turned pale. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of desperation. "Your Honor, I don't think racial statistics are relevant to this case. We're here about one specific incident, involving one specific individual who showed inappropriate behavior." Judge Monroe leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes never leaving her face. "Actually, Detective Whitmore," he said calmly, "your pattern of behavior is absolutely relevant to your credibility. When an officer's arrest record shows extreme racial differences, it raises serious questions about motivation and judgment." Whitmore's composure started to crumble. Her confident, professional mask began to slip, and the anger she usually kept hidden began to show. "Your Honor, with respect," she said tightly, "I've served this community faithfully for 15 years. I've risked my life to protect citizens, including citizens who look like you." The words hung in the air like a slap. The whole courtroom went still. Everyone had heard it. The phrase, "citizens who look like you," echoed off the walls. Judge Monroe felt the collective gasp from the people in the gallery. It was the kind of sound people make when someone crosses a line that should never be crossed. But instead of anger, he felt something colder, the kind of clarity that comes when someone finally reveals exactly who they are. "Detective Whitmore," Judge Monroe said, standing slowly, "your service record is not being questioned here. What's being questioned are your methods, your judgment, and your apparent belief that a citizen's race determines their worthiness of constitutional protection." Whitmore stood up too, tall and tense, her height giving her a slightly intimidating presence. She was 5'10" and in full tactical gear. But everyone in the courtroom knew real power here didn't come from size or physical strength. It came from moral authority. And that belonged entirely to the judge. She didn't yet realize that she was about to expose something far worse than bias, something that could destroy her career completely. "Look, Your Honor," she said suddenly, her voice dropping low, carrying an edge that sounded almost like a threat. "I know what this is really about. It's about politics, not justice. It's about defending criminals instead of victims. It's about turning cops into social workers." Her words cracked open something ugly. The professional mask she wore every day, calm, composed, righteous, was falling away. Underneath was the prejudice that had shaped her entire career. Judge Monroe didn't flinch. He stayed standing, posture straight, tone even. "Detective Whitmore, this is about equal protection under the law," he said firmly. "It's about whether a 15-year-old girl has the right to exist in public space without being treated like a criminal because of the color of her skin." Whitmore's face turned red, her jaw tightening with rage. "You people always twist things," she snapped, her voice rising. "You always make it about race when it's about respect, about law and order." The phrase, "you people," hit the air like a final nail in her coffin. There was no misunderstanding what she meant. Her prejudice was laid bare for everyone to see. Judge Monroe looked at her in silence for a long moment. He understood that what stood before him wasn't just one bad officer. It was the living image of everything broken in American policing. The casual racism, the abuse of power, the arrogance, and the belief that a badge made someone untouchable. But this wasn't the end. He knew something else, that the truth about Detective Whitmore went even deeper. Hidden in his desk drawer was a file that contained evidence. Evidence powerful enough to expose not just her crimes, but the entire system that had protected her. "Mr. Delgado," Judge Monroe said calmly to his court administrator, "please retrieve the evidence folder from my chambers." File marked "More Investigation." Whitmore's face drained of all color at the sound of that name. For the first time since stepping into the courtroom, she looked genuinely afraid. "Your Honor," she said quickly, her voice trembling, "I don't know what kind of games you're playing with old files, but this case is about Amani Brooks, not ancient history." Judge Monroe gave a small smile, cold, controlled, and full of purpose. "Detective Whitmore," he said, "nothing about Malik Moore's murder is ancient history. And what I'm about to show this court will prove that Amani Brooks is simply your latest victim in a pattern of racist violence. Violence protected by corruption for far too long." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Everyone could feel the tension in the air. Something big was coming. Court Administrator Ethan Delgado returned a moment later, carrying a thick manila folder and a laptop. His movements were steady, almost ritual-like, as if he knew the importance of what he held. The folder had official police department seals and evidence tags, but the judge knew the truth. The most important contents were never meant to see daylight. "Detective Whitmore," Judge Monroe said, opening the folder carefully, "let's discuss your encounter with 16-year-old Malik Moore on March 15th, 2 years ago. Do you remember that night?" Whitmore's hands started to tremble. Her voice shook when she answered. "That case was closed after a full investigation. I was cleared of any wrongdoing. I even received a commendation for heroism under fire." "Yes," the judge said, lifting a document for everyone to see. "According to the official report, Malik Moore was an armed suspect who threatened your life, forcing you to use deadly force in self-defense." Whitmore nodded eagerly, perhaps believing she was being offered a lifeline. "That's correct, Your Honor. He was reaching for a weapon when I fired. It was a textbook defensive shooting." Judge Monroe set the official report aside and picked up another paper, this one written in Whitmore's own handwriting, stamped with the original date. "That's interesting," he said slowly. "Because your first report, the one you filed only hours after the shooting, tells a very different story." Whitmore's voice cracked. "Your Honor, preliminary reports are often inaccurate. Officers are under a lot of stress during critical incidents." Judge Monroe didn't stop. "Your initial report states, and I quote, subject appeared to be running away when engagement began. No weapon visible at time of first shot. Subject fell immediately and did not move after impact." The words hit like thunder. People in the gallery gasped. A woman covered her mouth in horror. Everyone understood what that meant. The boy hadn't been threatening her. He'd been running away when she shot him in the back. Judge Monroe continued, reading the next lines. Subject was approximately 15 feet away and moving away from officer position when shots were fired. No weapon recovered at scene initially. Whitmore tried to interrupt, voice high and desperate. "Those are just preliminary observations. The official investigation determined." "The official investigation," the judge said firmly, "was a cover-up. And you're about to see how deep that cover-up went." He gestured to Ethan Delgado, who had just connected the laptop to the courtroom's large monitor. The screen flickered to life, showing a paused video frame. Whitmore's color drained completely. "What the court is about to see," Judge Monroe announced, "is body camera footage from Detective Whitmore's encounter with Malik Moore. This is the original unedited footage that was ruled inadmissible due to supposed technical issues." Whitmore jumped to her feet. "Your Honor, that footage was sealed by department order. If someone accessed it..." "It was leaked to me," the judge said, voice calm and cutting, "by someone who couldn't live with the silence anymore, someone who understood that covering up murder makes you part of it." The monitor came to life. The timestamp read March 15th, 9:23 p.m. The footage was grainy, shaky, with the low-resolution look of a police body cam. You could hear Whitmore's steady breathing, the sound of her boots hitting the pavement, and the quiet hum of streetlights. Her recorded voice spoke clearly. "Subject spotted on foot, moving between parked vehicles. Appears to be a juvenile male, approximately 16 to 18 years old." The camera showed a small figure slipping between cars, a teenage boy in dark clothing, moving carefully, clearly trying not to be seen. In the courtroom, Whitmore whispered, "Your Honor, this is out of context," but the judge raised his hand for silence. The footage zoomed in. Malik Moore's face appeared, frightened, tear-streaked, his empty hands raised high. "Please don't shoot, officer," his voice came through the speakers, shaking. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just walking home from my job at the grocery store." Whitmore's voice on the recording was cold and professional. Subject displaying suspicious behavior and potential threat indicators. Preparing to assess compliance level. But the video showed the truth. Malik wasn't threatening her. He was scared, trying to make himself small, his grocery store uniform and name tag clearly visible. "I don't have any weapons," he pleaded. "You can search me. Please, I just want to go home to my little sister." In the courtroom, Whitmore's real-life face was a picture of panic. Sweat rolled down her forehead. Her voice shook as she said, "Your Honor, there were reports of armed suspects in the area." "No," Judge Monroe interrupted sharply. "There were no such reports. No calls. No warnings. Nothing. You lied." On the monitor, Malik was still pressed against a fence, hands in the air. Then came Whitmore's recorded voice, subject reaching toward waistband. Threat level high. But everyone could see, his hands never moved. Malik's final words echoed in the courtroom, raw and haunting, "Please don't hurt me. Tell my mama I love her." Then came 3 gunshots, loud, sharp, final. Malik collapsed instantly. The body camera kept rolling. Whitmore walked closer to the motionless body. Her whisper was caught by the mic. "Stupid kid should have known better than to run in this neighborhood." Gasps filled the courtroom. Some people cried openly. Others sat frozen in shock. Whitmore looked destroyed, gripping the chair to stay standing. "Your Honor," she begged, "you have to understand. Officers make split-second decisions." Judge Monroe's voice cut her off like a blade. "What we just witnessed was not a split-second decision," he said coldly. "That was the deliberate execution of an unarmed child begging for his life." Whitmore's composure shattered completely. Standing at the witness stand, she started shouting, her voice full of the wild anger of a trapped animal. "You think you understand police work?" she yelled at the judge. "You think sitting there in your fancy robe gives you the right to judge officers who risk their lives every single day?" If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe and share your favorite part in the comments below. And don't forget to drop a heart to show your support. Judge Monroe looked at her calmly, his face firm and steady. "I think murdering children and lying about it in your reports makes you a criminal, not a hero," he said with a voice that was calm but powerful enough to cut through the noise in the courtroom. Detective Kara Whitmore took a step forward toward the judge's bench. Her movement was sharp and aggressive, enough to make the court security guards shift in their seats, ready to act if needed. "You people always twist everything," she snapped. "That kid was in trouble. I could tell just by looking at him. He was going to end up dead or in prison anyway. I just saved society the trouble." A gasp went through the courtroom. What she said next shocked everyone to the core. Her words filled the air like poison, heavy and deadly. In just a few sentences, she had revealed her hateful, racist beliefs for everyone to see. She had basically confessed to killing a child just because of his race and her assumption that all black teenagers were criminals. Judge Monroe felt something cold settle in his chest, a mix of sadness and grim satisfaction. Whitmore had just confessed in open court. It was the moment he had been preparing for. Her own words had given him everything he needed to end her career and send her to prison. But he wasn't finished with her yet. There was still one more piece of evidence that would prove her crimes had been hidden and protected for years. Detective Whitmore, the judge said, his voice calm but strong, since you're so eager to share your opinions about policing black youth, perhaps you'd like to explain this audio recording to the court. He nodded to his clerk, Ethan Delgado, who opened a new file on the courtroom laptop. The speakers crackled, and suddenly, the room was filled with voices everyone recognized instantly. It was Whitmore and another woman. The recording sounded like it was taken in a restaurant or a bar, with soft chatter and clinking glasses in the background. As soon as Whitmore heard it, her face went through a storm of emotions. Shock, fear, and finally, cold, hard realization. She knew her private words, the things she thought no one would ever hear, were now being played in front of a packed courtroom. "What you're about to hear will make your blood boil," the judge said quietly. Then, Whitmore's voice came through the speakers, slightly slurred but unmistakably hers. "The problem with policing today is that we're not allowed to do our jobs properly anymore," she said. "Every time we take down one of these punks, some bleeding heart judge complains about excessive force." A harsh laugh followed. Captain Victoria Victor, Whitmore's direct supervisor. "Tell me about it," she said. "Remember that Moore kid? That little thug got exactly what he deserved, but we still had to play nice with his family for months." Whitmore's voice continued, casual and cold. "That boy was asking for it, walking around like he owned the place, probably selling drugs or planning a gang thing. These kids need to learn that actions have consequences." "Too bad more cops don't teach that lesson," Victor replied. "Maybe we'd have fewer problems if more of them learned to respect authority." Whitmore laughed, a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed through the courtroom. "Don't worry about that, Victoria. I make sure every kid in my patrol area knows the score. Most of them learn real quick after they hear what happened to their friend Malik." The room fell silent. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. Two officers joking about killing a 16-year-old boy, treating it like it was just another day on the job. Some jurors looked pale. Others stared down at the floor. The sound of Whitmore laughing on the tape filled the courtroom again, and it was enough to make the air feel thick and heavy. When the recording stopped, Whitmore looked broken. The color had drained from her face. "Where did you get that recording?" she whispered, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. "Someone who couldn't stay silent anymore," Judge Monroe said. "Someone who realized that protecting murderers makes you just as guilty as they are." Whitmore's confidence was gone now. The arrogance she had shown before was replaced with fear and panic. "Your Honor," she began weakly, "those conversations were taken out of context. Cops use dark humor to deal with stress. It doesn't mean—" "Detective Whitmore," the judge cut her off, his voice still calm but sharp as a blade. "We just heard you and your supervisor celebrate the murder of a child and talk about scaring other black teenagers with it. There is no context that makes that acceptable." The courtroom stayed silent. Everyone knew what they had just heard. The truth about racism and corruption in the police department had been dragged into the light. Whitmore slumped in her chair, her shoulders shaking. The confident officer who had walked into court that morning was gone. Now she looked like someone whose world had just fallen apart. "Your Honor," she said finally, her voice trembling, "I need to speak to my lawyer. This is a setup, a witch hunt. You're trying to destroy my career." Judge Monroe looked at her steadily. "Detective Whitmore, you're testifying under oath in Miss Brooks's case. You may choose to remain silent from this point on, but everything you've already said is part of the official record. Every word is documented." Her hands were shaking violently now. Every single thing she had said, every racist comment, every cruel boast, it was all written down and recorded forever. There was no escaping it. "This is a setup," she shouted suddenly, her voice echoing off the walls. "You planned this to trap me. You don't care about justice. You just want to ruin a good cop who was doing her job." Judge Monroe didn't react. Instead, he opened a thick folder marked with official FBI letterheads and seals. Whitmore's eyes widened as soon as she saw the federal insignias. For the first time, she realized how deep her trouble really was. "Detective Whitmore," the judge said, "what you don't understand is that this case stopped being about Amani Brooks the moment you confessed to killing Malik Moore. Federal authorities have been monitoring this case for months." At that moment, the courtroom doors opened. 3 people in dark suits entered the room, moving with quiet authority. The man in front, gray-haired and serious, stepped forward holding credentials. "Your Honor," he said, "I'm Special Agent Christopher Marcus with the FBI Civil Rights Division. We have warrants for Detective Kara Whitmore's arrest on federal charges, deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice." Whitmore froze. The room spun around her. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "Internal Affairs cleared me. The DA reviewed everything. I followed protocol." Agent Marcus approached her calmly, handcuffs ready. "Detective Kara Whitmore," he said evenly, "you are under arrest for violations of federal civil rights law. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Whitmore's knees buckled. Her entire career, built on lies, violence, and fear, was collapsing in front of her. She looked out at the courtroom, her face twisted with anger and disbelief. "You people set me up," she screamed. "This is a conspiracy to destroy a good cop who did what needed to be done." Judge Monroe stood slowly, commanding the entire courtroom's attention. "Detective Whitmore," he said, "the only person who destroyed your career was you. Every confession came from your own mouth. Every crime was your choice. Now you'll face the consequences you thought would never come." But Whitmore still wasn't done. As the FBI agent began reading her rights again, the judge raised a hand. "Agent Marcus," he said, "before you take Detective Whitmore into custody, there's more evidence your team needs to hear. Evidence that proves this conspiracy extends far beyond one officer." Whitmore's face went from pale to gray. She knew exactly what was coming next. Ethan Delgado opened another audio file. "What the court is about to hear," Judge Monroe said, "is a recording of Detective Whitmore and her commanding officer, Captain Victoria Victor, at the annual Police Benevolent Association dinner 6 months ago." The speakers filled the courtroom with the noise of a crowded restaurant, clinking glasses, laughter, and background chatter. Then, Whitmore's voice came through, a little tipsy but still clearly hers. "I want to thank you for backing me up on the Moore shooting," she said. "Some of the younger officers are starting to question my methods. It means a lot that you have my back." Victor's rough voice responded easily. "Kara, you do what you have to do to keep the streets safe. The public doesn't understand what it takes to police these neighborhoods. Sometimes you have to send a message." Whitmore laughed, her tone cruel and full of pride. "That's what I told Aaron. The Moore kid was perfect for that. Young, cocky, thought he could walk through my area without showing respect. His death taught the rest what happens when you don't obey." Victor's response revealed everything. "The key is making sure the paperwork tells the right story. As long as your report mentions aggressive behavior and failure to comply, Internal Affairs will always back you up." The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Everyone now understood. They were hearing proof that police officials were working together to cover up murders and protect bad cops. Whitmore stared straight ahead, her face completely white. The recording continued with Victor explaining how to fake reports. Always use words like aggressive posturing or non-compliance. Those terms make review boards think it was self-defense. "That's genius," Whitmore replied in the recording. "You can apply those words to anything. Eye contact, tone of voice, body language. Nobody can prove what someone's posture really meant." Now the truth was undeniable. It wasn't just one bad cop. It was a whole system that allowed racism and brutality to continue. Agent Marcus stopped reading the Miranda rights. He understood that what he was hearing changed everything. This wasn't just Whitmore's crime. It was an entire department's corruption. Whitmore tried to fight back one last time. "Your Honor, these were hypothetical conversations," she cried. "Cops talk about fake scenarios all the time." Judge Monroe shook his head. "Detective Whitmore, there's nothing hypothetical about Malik Moore's death. Or the 16 other black teenagers you arrested under false charges. Or the conspiracy we just heard between you and your commanding officers." The courtroom was completely silent now. Every person there could feel the heavy truth in the air. The mask of justice had been ripped off to reveal the ugly truth underneath. Whitmore's body slumped, her voice breaking. Her last defenses fell apart, replaced by raw hatred. "You want the truth?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the marble room. "Fine. I'll give you the goddamn truth about what it's really like policing these neighborhoods." Her scream was the sound of a system finally collapsing. Agent Marcus slowly moved closer to Detective Kara Whitmore, realizing that she was on the verge of a complete mental breakdown. Her breathing was sharp, her hands trembled, and her words were becoming more unstable with every sentence. Marcus had seen this before, the dangerous moment when rage and fear collided in someone's mind. He was ready to act if she became violent. Judge Monroe, meanwhile, stayed seated behind the tall wooden bench, his face calm and unreadable. His quiet, steady presence was the complete opposite of Whitmore's wild, unraveling anger. "These people," Whitmore said, her voice cracking like glass. "They don't understand respect. They don't understand authority. They walk around with their attitudes and their dirty looks, and we're just supposed to take it." Everyone in the courtroom froze. Those two words, "these people," had become Whitmore's signature phrase, something she said whenever she talked about the black and brown citizens she was supposed to protect. It revealed everything about how she saw the world, divided, hostile, and full of enemies. Judge Monroe watched her carefully. He'd spent decades studying how racism hides inside institutions and people's minds. He wasn't just seeing an officer losing control. He was watching a system exposing itself. What happened next stunned everyone. Whitmore's hands were shaking so hard that the papers she held slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor. Her face was red, her voice rising with raw emotion. "You sit up there in your fancy robe pretending to care about justice," she shouted, pointing at Judge Monroe. "But you don't know what it's like out there. You don't know what it's like facing gangbangers, drug dealers, and wannabe thugs every day." "Detective Whitmore," Judge Monroe replied, his tone calm and measured. "Malik Moore worked at a grocery store. Imani Brooks is an honor roll student. Neither of them were gang members or drug dealers." Whitmore blinked, her expression tightening into a sneer. "They all start somewhere," she snapped. That Moore kid was already showing signs. The way he walked, the way he looked at me, the attitude in his voice. I've been doing this long enough to recognize the pattern. A long, heavy silence filled the courtroom. Everyone realized what she had just admitted. She had judged and executed children not for what they did, but for how they looked. Her words exposed years of racist thinking hidden behind a badge and a gun. Judge Monroe's face remained calm, but inside he felt both horror and grim confirmation. Whitmore's breakdown was showing everyone exactly how deep the rot went, how a system could justify violence through fear and lies. Suddenly, Whitmore turned her fury back to him. Her voice was shaking but loud. "And you," she said, pointing again, her finger trembling. "You're the worst kind. You pretend to be some moral authority while you protect criminals. You think your law degree makes you better than us, better than cops who risk their lives every single day?" Gasps rippled through the courtroom. People leaned back in their seats, terrified but unable to look away. Judge Monroe, however, didn't flinch. He had spent his entire career standing up to people like Whitmore, those who believed anger gave them power. And though she was dangerous, her rage didn't frighten him. It exposed her. Whitmore's rant grew even louder, her words tumbling out like a storm she couldn't stop. "I protected this community for 15 years. I stopped crimes before they happened. I saved lives by getting rid of punks like that Moore kid before they could hurt anyone." In her mind, she was still a hero. But to everyone else, it was clear she was delusional. She truly believed that murdering unarmed children was justice. Judge Monroe's voice cut through her shouting like a blade. "Detective Whitmore," he said, his tone steady and cold. "You murdered a 16-year-old boy who was walking home from work. You terrorized children whose only crime was existing while black. You are not a protector. You are the criminal that good police officers should be protecting us from." The room fell silent again. Whitmore's face changed, anger twisted into fear, then back into something darker, calculation. She looked like a cornered predator. "You know what your problem is," she hissed, stepping closer to the bench. "You people think you're equal to us now. You think wearing a robe or a suit makes you better, but I know what you really are." Every person in the courtroom held their breath. The tension was thick enough to feel. It was clear something terrible was about to happen. The air seemed to hum. Whitmore was now only a few feet away from Judge Monroe's bench, her body coiled like a spring. "You think you're untouchable up there," she said in a low, threatening whisper. "You think that robe protects you from the real world? You're just another uppity." "Detective Whitmore," Judge Monroe interrupted, his voice rising with authority. "You will speak to this court with respect, or you'll be held in contempt. Your career is over. Your crimes are exposed. Don't make this worse for yourself." Whitmore laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed through the marble room. "Worse?" she sneered. "You already ruined my life with your fake evidence and conspiracy theories. What do I have left to lose?" Agent Marcus took another careful step closer. His hand hovered near his weapon. He could see it in her eyes, the shift from anger to violence. The court security officers around the room also tensed, waiting for a command. Then it happened. Whitmore moved. She stepped forward, fast and aggressive. The guards started toward her, but Judge Monroe lifted his hand to stop them. He refused to be intimidated. "Detective Whitmore," he said firmly, standing tall, "you've confessed to murder and exposed a conspiracy in your department. The only thing left is to take responsibility for your crimes. Pray the prosecutors show more mercy than you ever did." For a heartbeat, Whitmore stood perfectly still. Then her face hardened into pure hatred. "You know what, Your Honor," she said slowly. "It's time someone taught you what real authority looks like." She moved suddenly, a flash of motion, and before anyone could react, her leg swung in a brutal kick. Her heavy boot slammed into Judge Monroe's stomach with bone-shaking force. The sound of the impact echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Crack! The judge was thrown backward, crashing into his chair, gasping in pain. The blow was powerful enough to seriously injure him. Yet even as he bent over, clutching his side, his eyes stayed open, calm, and filled with resolve. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Agent Marcus drew his weapon and shouted for everyone to get down. Security officers rushed in from all directions. People screamed, some hiding under benches. Papers scattered. The entire courtroom had turned into a scene of pure panic. And Whitmore, standing over the fallen judge, looked almost proud. Her face was twisted with hatred and satisfaction. "That's what happens when you forget your place," she said loudly. But her moment of triumph lasted only seconds. "Kara Whitmore," Agent Marcus shouted, his voice commanding and firm. "You are under federal arrest for assaulting a federal judge, a crime punishable by up to 20 years in prison." The guards tackled her to the ground. She struggled, screaming and cursing, but they held her down with professional skill. Cold steel cuffs locked around her wrists. The woman who had once walked the halls of justice with arrogance was now face down on the marble floor. Judge Monroe pushed himself upright slowly, pale and bruised, but composed. A red mark was already spreading across his ribs where the kick had landed, yet his voice didn't shake. "Let the record show," he said clearly, "that Detective Kara Whitmore has physically assaulted a sitting federal judge in open court before multiple witnesses." Agent Marcus nodded and gave hand signals to his team. What happened next showed that the assault was only the tip of something much bigger. "Your Honor," Marcus said, stepping forward, "we've been investigating Detective Whitmore for the past 8 months. What happened here today gives us the final proof we needed to take down her entire network." Judge Monroe accepted a glass of water from his clerk and took a careful sip. His ribs hurt, but his mind was sharp. He realized now that the federal agents hadn't just been here for courtroom security. They had been waiting for this exact moment. "How large is this investigation, Agent Marcus?" he asked. Marcus turned toward the doors. More federal agents entered the room carrying briefcases and evidence boxes. "We have warrants for 12 officers in Whitmore's precinct," he said. "We're executing raids on 4 police stations right now. Our teams are seizing computers, files, and surveillance data as we speak." Whitmore lifted her head from the floor, eyes wide with disbelief. "That's impossible," she shouted. "Internal Affairs cleared me. The DA's office reviewed every case." Marcus looked down at her, his expression cold and professional. "Detective Whitmore, the investigation began when Mrs. Angela Moore, Malik Moore's mother, contacted our Civil Rights Division 2 years ago. She kept copies of every report your department tried to erase. She never gave up." The courtroom buzzed with shock. Malik's mother, the woman Whitmore had mocked and dismissed, had secretly built the case that would destroy her. Marcus continued, "We also received help from Detective Raymond Reeves in Internal Affairs. He gave us proof of destroyed evidence, falsified reports, and intimidation of witnesses. Your supervisor, Captain Victoria Victor, is being arrested at her home right now." Whitmore's face twisted in panic. "You planned this. The whole hearing was a setup." Judge Monroe straightened, pain shooting through his ribs, but his voice stayed strong. "Detective Whitmore, this hearing was about Imani Brooks, about her right to exist without being criminalized for her race. You exposed yourself. No one forced you to confess." Marcus's radio crackled with updates. "Command, we have Victor in custody. Aaron is resisting but contained. We've recovered 400 case files and 17 hard drives from East Precinct." The scale of the operation was staggering. It wasn't just about one detective anymore. It was about exposing an entire network of corruption. Whitmore was pulled to her feet, still struggling as the cuffs cut into her wrists. Her face flickered between rage and panic. "This is all because of that one punk kid," she shouted. "Everything was fine until you people started stirring up trouble." Judge Monroe stared at her, his eyes filled with a calm, cold certainty. "Malik Moore wasn't a punk," he said firmly. "He was a 16-year-old boy with a family who loved him, a job he worked hard at, and a future you stole. Now you'll finally face justice for what you did." The sound of her boots echoed against the marble as agents led her out of the courtroom, the same halls where she once strutted with untouchable confidence. Within hours, the FBI's operation swept across the city. 17 officers were arrested from 3 different precincts. Charges included civil rights violations, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. Captain Victoria Victor was taken into custody while eating dinner with her family. The news showed her being led away in handcuffs, her shocked face plastered across every TV screen. Lieutenant Jennifer Aaron tried to barricade herself in her office, destroying documents until agents broke down the door. They caught her trying to feed files into a shredder. But the biggest surprise came from Detective Raymond Reeves, the Internal Affairs officer who had been secretly recording his corrupt co-workers for over a year. Agent Marcus set up a command center inside the courthouse conference room, filled with laptops, photos, and evidence boards. Judge Monroe joined him, still bruised but determined to see justice done. "Your Honor," Marcus said, laying out folders and audio transcripts. "Reeves's recordings prove that Whitmore's behavior wasn't a secret. Her superiors knew about it. They actually encouraged it, told other officers to follow her methods." Judge Monroe looked at the files, the pictures, the names. It was bigger than anyone had imagined, a culture of hatred and abuse running deep inside the department. And now, because of one hearing, one outburst, and one mother who refused to give up, it was all coming crashing down. For the first time in years, justice was no longer just a word in a courtroom. It was something real, something powerful enough to finally break the system that had protected people like Kara Whitmore for far too long. The photographs showed training sessions where Detective Whitmore was presented as an example of proactive policing. She was used as a model for younger police officers, teaching them how to notice what she called pre-criminal behavior in young people from minority communities. But behind those professional-sounding words was a terrible truth. Whitmore was training a whole generation of officers to see black teenagers as naturally suspicious, dangerous, and deserving of harsh treatment before they had even done anything wrong. One video recording showed Captain Victor speaking proudly to a room full of new recruits. "Detective Whitmore has shown exceptional skill in stopping crimes before they happen," he said. "Her ability to identify troublemakers early has made her patrol area one of the safest in the county." But the so-called troublemakers he was talking about weren't criminals. They were kids like Malik Moore and Imani Brooks, teenagers whose only crime was being black in Whitmore's neighborhood. The problems she was solving were actually basic human rights, the kind that are supposed to be protected by the Constitution. Whitmore was destroying those rights every day, and her department allowed it to happen. When investigators finally uncovered the files, what they found shocked everyone. The evidence taken from police computers revealed the true scale of the corruption. Inside the emails were messages between Captain Victor and Lieutenant Aaron, showing them working together to cover up police shootings. They shared instructions on how to rewrite official reports so the officers involved would look innocent and get favorable reviews from internal boards. One email from Aaron to Victor said, "Whitmore's latest incident needs narrative adjustment. Her first report says the suspect was retreating. Change it to emphasize threat indicators and officer safety concerns." Victor quickly replied, "Already in progress. Internal Affairs review next month. Media attention is low. The family is unlikely to take legal action because of the subject's juvenile record." Reading these cold exchanges made people sick. The way these officers talked about changing evidence and hiding deaths as if they were fixing typos showed that corruption had become normal in their department. It was routine. It was how they did business. Judge Elias Monroe felt nauseated when he read those files. He saw how casually people described actions that destroyed families and ruined lives. But the most shocking discovery didn't come from emails. It came from financial records. Investigators found that Whitmore and her team were getting special bonuses for keeping crime statistics low in their patrol areas. The department was literally paying officers extra money to make it seem like there was less crime. That meant officers had two ways to earn those bonuses: cover up crimes or stop them before they were reported, often by scaring, threatening, or hurting people. By that evening, 3 more officers had A.G. Linwood to plead guilty in exchange for lighter sentences. In return, they promised to tell the truth about their superiors. Detective Talia Calder, who happened to share a last name with one of Whitmore's victims, gave a full statement. She described how Captain Victor trained them to manipulate evidence and intimidate witnesses. Officer Marcus Linwood revealed that Whitmore often bragged about her lessons for black teens, saying that shooting Malik Moore was a way of teaching the community respect. The corruption was deeper than anyone expected. Prosecutors were involved too. They accepted Whitmore's fake reports without ever investigating. Even internal affairs officers, the ones supposed to keep everyone honest, had taken part. They hid complaints and looked the other way, all in exchange for promotions or better assignments. The truth became clear: Whitmore's violence had been protected by an entire system. Every level of law enforcement had chosen to protect the police instead of protecting the public. Finally, justice started to move. The federal investigation expanded beyond Riverside County after investigators found the same pattern of abuse in neighboring areas. Agent Marcus's team discovered that Whitmore's ideas had spread like a disease. Her methods were shared through police trainers and consultants across several states. 3 weeks after her arrest, the Department of Justice announced the largest civil rights investigation in decades. It included 14 police departments and more than 200 officers accused of taking part in or supporting the abuse of minority youth. Attorney General Simone Graves spoke at a national press conference. Her voice was calm but firm. "What we have uncovered in Riverside County represents a betrayal of everything law enforcement is supposed to stand for," she said. "This investigation will follow the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of rank or political connection." Soon, investigators found a massive breakthrough from an unexpected place: body camera footage. The videos had automatically uploaded to cloud servers but were never reviewed by supervisors. When federal investigators went through months of footage, they found hundreds of videos showing officers using Whitmore's racist methods. The most horrifying clips showed them mocking or threatening minority teenagers while talking openly about their techniques. In one video, Officer Renee Calder, one of Whitmore's followers, stopped a 14-year-old black girl because she said the girl's walking pattern looked suspicious. When the girl asked why she was being stopped, Calder said, "Whitmore taught me that you people always try to lawyer up when you're caught. That's how we know you're guilty." The phrase, "you people," had become a signature of Whitmore's trainees. Federal investigators began searching for that phrase in messages, emails, and police databases. What they found was terrifying: a network of officers across multiple agencies using the same racist language and methods. Then came the discovery that turned the case from local corruption to organized crime. Investigators found secret group chats where officers, including Whitmore, shared personal information about families they labeled as problems. They coordinated harassment to silence anyone who complained. One message from Whitmore read, "More families still asking questions about their son. Might need extra pressure to encourage them to stop." Officer Dana Ricks replied, "Already spread word through informants that the family is unarinative. Should create enough pressure to make them quiet." These messages showed that the Moore family, who had already lost their teenage son, were being bullied and intimidated by the same officers who killed him. It was cruel beyond words. Federal prosecutors decided to treat Whitmore's entire group as a criminal organization. They began preparing RICO charges, the same type of charges used against the mafia. Under federal law, the most serious civil rights violations could result in life in prison. 6 months after Whitmore's violent outburst in courtroom 7A, the federal prosecutions began. The results were historic. Whitmore was convicted on 17 federal charges, including conspiracy, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. She was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. The judge said her attack on Judge Monroe showed her total rejection of the rule of law. Captain Victor was sentenced to 45 years in prison for organizing the cover-ups and violating civil rights. Lieutenant Aaron received 30 years for helping hide evidence and threaten witnesses. Their sentences shocked law enforcement agencies across the country. It was a message that racism and corruption would no longer be protected by silence or bureaucracy. Justice had finally arrived, but the story wasn't over. Mrs. Angela Moore, Malik's mother, became the public face of the federal case. Her courage and dignity inspired families across the country who had faced similar injustice. After Whitmore's sentencing, she spoke outside the courthouse to a crowd of reporters and supporters. "My son Malik was murdered by a woman who thought black children's lives didn't matter," she said. "But his death will not be in vain if it prevents other mothers from feeling this pain." In the end, investigators identified 47 families whose children had been harmed by Whitmore's network. Each family received financial compensation, but even more importantly, official recognition that their children had been wronged by the system that was supposed to protect them. Imani Brooks, now 16, was doing well in school and had become a youth advocate for police reform. "I used to be scared of police officers," she said during a youth conference. "Now I know that good officers want the same thing we do: safe communities where everyone is treated fairly. The bad ones were scared of us because they knew we could expose their lies." Her courage and honesty helped others heal. The reforms that followed changed everything. Judge Monroe turned down offers to move to higher courts. He chose to stay in criminal court so he could keep protecting vulnerable youth. His courtroom became a model for judges nationwide. Other judges visited to learn how to recognize and confront systemic racism in their own cases. The Riverside County Police Department was completely restructured under federal control. It got new leadership, new training, and strict community oversight. New rules required that every police interaction be recorded and reviewed. Body camera policies were rewritten to prevent technical problems that once hid evidence of abuse. But the most powerful change wasn't in policies, it was in culture. People began to understand that staying silent in the face of injustice made them part of the problem. The community realized that good people had to speak up, even when it was risky. Ethan Delgado, the court employee who secretly saved the recordings that exposed Whitmore, was promoted to director of court security. He became known nationwide as an expert on protecting courtrooms from corrupt officers. His courage helped prevent many future tragedies. The effects of the Whitmore case spread far beyond Riverside County. Federal investigations in 12 other states uncovered similar corruption. Over 300 officers were eventually convicted of crimes related to racism, violence, and cover-ups. 2 years after Whitmore's attack in the courtroom, Judge Monroe received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Moore knocked softly on his door, holding a small wrapped gift. She looked peaceful for the first time in years. "Judge Monroe," she said, sitting across from him. "I wanted to thank you for having the courage to stand up when it mattered. Malik's death finally has meaning because you refused to let Whitmore hide behind her badge." Inside the package was a framed photograph of Malik Moore in his graduation gown, smiling brightly. Below it was a small plaque that read, "Justice delayed is not justice denied. When good people decide to speak truth to power." Tears filled Judge Monroe's eyes as he looked at the picture. He saw the same hope and dignity in Malik's face that he had seen in so many young people who came into his courtroom, looking for protection from a system that had failed them. The Whitmore case became one of the most important moments in American civil rights history. It was studied in law schools and police academies as an example of how racism spreads through institutions, and how courage, truth, and evidence can destroy it. Judge Monroe's refusal to be intimidated proved that the law could still triumph over hate and violence. The federal consent decree that governed the Riverside County Police Department became a model for national reform. It required anti-bias training, community oversight, and transparency in misconduct investigations. In neighborhoods that used to fear the police, crime rates actually went down. People finally trusted law enforcement again because they saw fairness instead of fear. The constant harassment that once terrorized black youth was replaced by real community policing, focused on protection, not intimidation. Imani Brooks graduated at the top of her class and received a full scholarship to Howard University to study criminal justice. In her graduation speech, she said, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is doing what's right even when you're afraid." Judge Monroe showed me that one person standing up can change everything. The scholarship fund created in Malik Moore's name helped more than 200 young people go to college, students whose lives had been touched by police violence or injustice. Judge Monroe kept Malik's photo on his desk as a reminder that justice required both skill and bravery. Every case that came before him became an opportunity to either repeat the old system's failures or to create real healing and accountability. The courthouse where Mrs. Moore once stood alone demanding justice now hosted monthly community meetings. Police officers, residents, and youth leaders met there to keep communication open and prevent the kind of corruption that had once thrived in darkness. As the sun set on another day, Judge Monroe packed up his files and headed home to his husband, a trauma surgeon. The mark from Whitmore's attack had faded, but the memory of that moment remained clear, the moment he chose dignity over violence. Whitmore herself was serving her life sentence in a small 6 by 8 foot cell. She lived in isolation, far from the general population that included many of the young men whose lives she had destroyed. Her name became a warning in every police academy, a story of how power can destroy itself when it turns cruel. But Judge Monroe's name became a symbol of hope. It was spoken with respect in classrooms, courtrooms, and communities across the nation. His story reminded people that justice doesn't depend on power, it depends on courage. Sometimes, the strongest response to hate is simply refusing to be broken by it. Standing firm until truth wins. Some battles are not won by violence, but by staying where you are needed most, even when it would be easier to walk away. Judge Monroe chose to stay, and in doing so, reminded the entire nation what justice looks like when it refuses to be silenced. The courthouse lights dimmed as the day ended, but the work continued. As long as children needed protection from those who abused power, people like Monroe, Delgado, and Moore would keep standing up. Whitmore's kick, meant to silence him, had become the moment her world fell apart. If you're young, remember Imani Brooks was only 15 when she stood up to injustice. If you're a parent, remember Mrs. Moore never gave up on her son. If you're in authority, remember Judge Monroe chose the hard path because it was right. Change begins when one person decides that enough is enough. Whitmore thought her badge made her untouchable. She thought her racism would protect her. She thought violence would silence others. She was wrong. Judge Monroe proved that courage and truth are stronger than hate. Today, Malik Moore's name is engraved on a monument outside the courthouse. Imani Brooks is studying to become a civil rights lawyer. Mrs. Moore runs a foundation that helps families seek justice. Judge Monroe still protects youth from injustice. And Whitmore lives with the consequences of her choices, learning that cruelty is not strength. Justice may move slowly, but when good people refuse to give up, it always reaches the truth. Whitmore thought she was untouchable, but she was wrong. Judge Monroe showed that sometimes the most powerful response to hate is simply refusing to be broken by it. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more kind and powerful stories. Watch our next video for another unforgettable journey. And share this story with someone who needs it today.